do you know you're live? Like, you're just talking to each other. And I was like, yes, that's like the whole conceit of the show.
And we are now live.
Oh, good.
3 minutes late, but we're live. We had a little technical glitch, but we don't care because this is just something we do for fun. It is 5:03 p.m. on Friday, May 15th, 2020. We got some interesting Boris Johnson news for you all. Boris Johnson has gotten religion. He has announced that he, quote, has changed his mind and now backs interventionist anti-obesity strategy after getting the coronavirus. He is set to launch a new, renewed anti-obesity strategy amid concerns the disease affects overweight people more severely. He is said to have told ministers, I've changed my mind on this, according to a report in the Times. Now, I just want to point out that that means the evolution of Boris Johnson into Michael Bloomberg is beginning. Before you know it, he will be regulating the size of the drink, the soda you can buy in London. He's gonna, it's gonna be awful. Meanwhile, in North Korea, Kim Jong-un has removed the massive portraits of his father and grandfather from the main square, according to the New York Post, which again is, running riot.
We're taking the New York Post on North Korea now? Are these the days? Is this like what we've come to?
90% of the North Korea stories that we've ever talked about, all the hotties and vodka and the Dennis Rodman stuff, it's all coming from the New York Post.
He is a tabloid sensation.
They are the least responsible, quickest to the running.
What if the New York Post, wait for it, what if the New York Post is actually like the national newspaper of North Korea? And
it is sort of the National Enquirer of North Korea. And there has clearly been a decision at New York Post headquarters. We are going with North Korea news. We don't care if it's true. We don't care. They're all over the North Korea story. Look, it's their version of In Lieu of Fun. They have North Korea. We're not allowed to have fun anymore either. But in lieu of fun, we have Shane Harris, who's pretty good. So Shane, welcome to In Lieu of Fun.
Pretty good is high praise from Ben Wittes.
Oh, I feel blessed and honored. Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Ben, usually I'm hosting you, so it's nice to be in the other chair.
It's true. What are you drinking?
I am drinking kind of a nod to Rational Security, actually. This is a single malt original American whiskey that has tones of Scotch by my good friends at Copper Fox Distillery in Sperryville.
Oh, yeah, down near my cabin in the woods.
Yeah, this is in Sperryville. They have a distillery you can go. It's a great tour. You can do it when you're out in Rappahannock. There's a great antiques market next door. But we discovered this before we ever went to the distillery. And I think at a liquor store here in DC. But if you like Scotch, but you don't like super peaty Scotch, and you like whiskey, you will like this. It's delightful.
Well, just the other day, this showed up from a Virginia distillery as well.
What do you mean showed up? How does that happen to you? How do I get that to happen to me?
Well, you have to buy it.
Okay.
That didn't just show up.
That didn't show up. You bought it.
A Virginia single malt distillery called Courage and Conviction, and I had it yesterday, and I have to say it was quite lovely. So I am increasingly. There's also the Filibuster distillery people in Virginia. So Virginia is increasingly becoming. I don't want to offend any Kentuckians who are listening today, but they've got some good distilling going on in Virginia.
Yeah. And, you can get, I think this is true. I think at Mount Vernon, well, because George Washington, of course, had a distillery at Mount Vernon. I think you can buy whiskey there that is based on his recipe, but I believe it's certainly the case now that he didn't age the whiskey. So it's kind of like White Lightning a little bit.
I kind of feel like this is the story of like most of those old timey recipes, which is like actually things just tasted like shit back then. And so like they didn't have salt or like anything or ketchup. And so like.
That's true. I mean,
Basically, I tried the George Washington whiskey once. It was like, this is not good. This is bad.
It's good that we made it into the 19th
we're
century.
hurting all the time.
Salt tack. Like, what the hell is that?
Wait, but hang on. It did, if you inject it into your lungs, it did cure you of coronavirus.
Like a cleaning?
Right? Yeah, it was like a cleaning.
Like a cleaning. Well, here's my preventative strategy then.
All right. So, Shane, I'm sure we've got a lot of Rational Security viewers on who've got questions for you.
Also, you're our 51st show. You're bringing us into the next, you're tipping us over.
That brings us to the first key question, which is, how do you feel about not making the top 50?
Well, I was going to try and see if I could come on Thursday, but I didn't want to like preempt Popat. I heard you had him on.
Yeah, he was popular. A lot of love for Popat.
But I often think of like DC as the 51st state. So 51 sounds right to me. This is my home. And so I'll take 51. Yeah.
All right. Good.
Correct attitude.
Yeah. I mean, who knew we were going to be doing this for 51 days? But we have done it straight 7 days a week.
I remember when I had a brief moment of like, maybe I'll try to get Ben to take the weekends off. And then I was like, no, I can just push through for like a couple of weekends and we can just do this every day. And now
I admire your perseverance. You guys have gone non-stop. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel takes the weekend.
We do not plan anything. So it's not like, and it's not produced, right, Ben? And so like what you see is what you get.
All planning for the show takes place on the show. And that's what we do on the Saturday show, is we kind of plan the show for the week. And we kind of text people and say, hey, will you come on such and such? And we take suggestions from the audience about who we should have. You have been a consistent, whenever we've said who should we have, we consistently get, requests for Shane Harris. So,
oh my gosh, like from the first moment.
Really? Yeah, so that should generate a lot of pressure on you, frankly.
Oh, well, I live for it.
Yeah, no, it's kind of
only like high stakes engagement.
High stakes engagement. Speaking of, contact tracing.
Yeah.
Go.
I'm very much in favor of it. I actually found this website today, which was started by a bunch of people, including a Bloomberg columnist and someone who was in a startup. I'm going to mangle it, but anyway, some just Silicon Valley people, where they're basically ranking the states on who is ready to do contact tracing, and they're looking at the rate, essentially the percentage of positive testing and where it's trending, and how many contact tracers they've actually hired. And so everyone is kind of like ranked on like a green, you're good to go, versus a red, like you are nowhere near it. And it was interesting. Very few, according to their metric, have hired enough people to do it. But people are moving in that direction. There are shades between green and red. So, I think we ran an opinion column today in the Post too, and I'm going to forget the author's name, but she was a public health expert and essentially saying, look, we're not going to do testing and contact tracing at the level that needs to be done. We might get there, but it's not really looking like all 50 states plus the district are going to get there in time. So we are basically in a mitigate harm strategy right now, a harm containment strategy, I think is what she called it. And sort of analogized it to the idea of, when we were dealing with HIV, when it was an early, outbreak, and we were sort of trying to put like procedures in place for just, practice safe sex and practice these sort of, kind of mediation steps, as opposed to like, we're going to get a virus or we're going to try to manage it this way. It's more of a harm reduction strategy. And I thought that was compelling and kind of, an interesting kind of step beyond the whole conversation about testing, because if we're not really going to get to that level of testing, then what are we talking about doing here to try and make it so people can start getting back to something close to a normal life, but do it safely? But the conversation feels like it's turning a little bit this week.
So we don't usually turn to audience questions this early, but Jacob Slutsky has an interesting one, and he's informs me that he's got to go pretty soon. So I'm going to bring him in quickly to pose his question before he has to turn into a pumpkin. Mr. Slutsky, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's really great to be on. I feel a little starstruck.
You got to get over that, dude.
Thank you.
We're just a few assholes sitting around here.
As is
not
becoming clearer by the
complicated.
minute.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
So
like
I'm
Cheers, but we're less good looking.
Right,
I
exactly.
love it.
That's what they
so
say
I'm
about
just-
DC. You know, Hollywood for ugly people.
So I'm just curious. I saw that Hipsy released all of its transcripts, and there was the brouhaha surrounding it. But you know, I have a tab open, and it's going to be in my browser forever. And I'm just curious if all of you have gleaned through that, and if you found anything of particular interest.
Really interesting question, Shane. What have you learned from the if anything, from the released Hipsy transcripts?
I will confess, Ben and Jacob, that I did not look closely at them. I was working on some other stories this week. I had not heard about anything really sort of percolating and popping out of it, although I know there was some controversy, I guess, around the question of whether these revealed Adam Schiff, you know, exaggerating the nature of the collusion possibility between Donald Trump and the Russians. So not a lot really jumped out there. I guess some people sort of seized on bits and pieces of it. I wish I had a better answer for you, Jacob, frankly. I guess I came up in it, though, because Matt Tate was apparently interviewed. So my name came up.
Matt, as did mine, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Matt Tate criticized my choice of headlines for his story. So Matt, if you're listening to this, that was a chicken shit move. You shouldn't criticize my headline choice.
He'll tell a closed committee, but he won't tell you to your face.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna say it to my face, dude. No, I love Matt, and he's free to. And to be fair to him, he did not choose that headline. I did, and he is totally free to.
Editors choose all headlines.
I have to say, it was an awesome headline. The headline was that time I got recruited to collude with the Russians. I think the story amply supported it.
I mean, that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what happened. He is perfectly entitled to feel like I juiced it just a little bit, and that's the normal tension between writers and editors. So that said, I do think there are some things in there that we learned, and I'll give you one example right off the bat. And a shout out to Marcy Wheeler, who really nailed this one, and I was going to write something along these lines, and she beat me to it, actually, and got it. Marcy and I disagree about a lot of things, but she really nailed this. So when they released the Flynn unmasking list, there were a bunch of things that were apparent from the list that a lot of reporters didn't pick up. And they assumed that this list was a list of people who had unmasked the Flynn Kislyak call, which it very clearly is not, for a lot of reasons. And a lot of those reasons are actually evident in those testimony transcripts. So for example, that this is NSA product, not FBI product. We know from the fact that people testified that this was, the FBI found this material in their own holdings. We know
it was
that
FBI product,
it was FBI holdings, not NSA holdings. This list is NSA, right?
Right.
We also know that we know a series of things, and Marcy actually goes through and grabs the specific passages where Comey testifies to certain things, or Andy McCabe does. And these are little tidbits, but if you accumulate them, they're pretty significant in showing what this list is not, actually. And from what it is not, you can get a pretty good sense of what it probably is. And so I actually have, like Shane, have not personally gone through every document yet, although I will. But I do think that there's probably the fact that within a week of these things, Marcy is able to use it to show a bunch of things that are intuitively right, and that I kind of was able to intuit, but she was able to show chapter and verse on it from these lists from these testimonies. And I think that fact is interesting and significant, and there's probably a lot of material like that in there.
Can I say something else about that list that was released this week too? Because I mean, this is what
Does it involve the words bullshit?
Well, you can say that. I couldn't possibly comment. But I spent the past couple of days with this, in reporting on this story. And one of the things that is fascinating about this is when we talk about unmasking, and I had to do a little Q&A on what is unmasking, because a lot of people don't.
Yeah, that's a good piece, by the way, and people should, if you have questions about the unmasking process, that's a very good little short explainer.
It's a very handy kind of thing, a little tip sheet. And what struck me about this list that came out is, to your point, Ben, I mean, we all talk about unmasking in the context of Flynn's conversations with Sergei Kislyak. And of course, I think part of the, Obamagate, which we're struggling to define, has as one of its, precepts is that unmasking equaled leaking the Flynn Kislyak conversation, which of course those may be related events, but trying to draw a line between them is kind of misleading. But point being, a lot of the unmasking requests on this list both clearly predated the conversation with Kislyak, and so therefore raised the question of, well, what else was going on that was prompting so many officials to request, based on intelligence reporting or summaries that they were seeing, to make requests that revealed Mike Flynn's name. Now, it may just be that in the course of him reaching out to foreign officials in the transition period as the incoming national security advisor, that was generating reporting on, a U.S. person in contact with various foreign officials, and people unmasked it to see what was going on. It doesn't, indicate necessarily anything nefarious was going on, but there were a number of different interactions Mike Flynn was having with foreign officials that were very troubling during that transition period to the people in the intelligence community, including, a meeting that we know from a story we broke in the Washington Post that he had in Trump Tower with Sergei Kislyak and Jared Kushner, where they talked about setting up a back channel communication to Russia in the Russian embassy, apparently for the purposes of evading surveillance by U.S. intelligence, which was monitoring Sergei Kislyak. So, I don't know if that is reflected in this list that we've seen, as a question we've been trying to answer, but, it raises all kinds of interesting questions, and also provides an insight, I think, into the broad variety of officials who do routinely request unmasking. I mean, yes, Joe Biden is on that list, but so are 2 unidentified station chiefs at the CIA. So is the ambassador to Turkey and his deputy, so is the ambassador to the UN. So it's an interesting, fascinating window that, has, as so many of these things often do, raise more questions than answers.
Can I raise one kind of meta point, which is like that maybe we need a new word for this, given our current moment, other than unmask, which I know that's like a little thing, but I was just kind of like, when I was kind of reading this initially, I was like, what kind of news is this? Is this like a de-anonymizing news, or is this COVID news? I really literally didn't know. And when I saw the headline,
you can all unmask now.
It sort of has this implication that Michael Flynn was, doing the right thing, walking down the street with his mask on, and Dennis McDonough and Susan Rice and
mask is no longer a metaphor.
Snuck up behind him and tore his mask off,
right,
and COVIDed him.
Exactly. Right.
So
I mean, I just think that it's really interesting that we need like a literal, like there is a very literal definition of mask now, and like the word maskless, I'm sure, is going to be added to the Oxford English Dictionary by the end of the year.
I think we're just the word identify would work.
Right. Identify, de-anonymize.
Yeah. I mean, the FBI's parlance. So masking and unmasking is NSA speak. The FBI says minimize and unminimize. I believing in plain English, kind of like reveal the name of,
name,
or identify
name.
Right? But I'm not a government bureaucrat. Matthew Chakoff, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so first off, wanted to say once again, huge fan of Rational Security, Shane. I was actually on this podcast this show yesterday. I was the Orange.
You're a stalker, man.
Yes,
You're just stalking Shane wherever he goes.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to ask about the independent counsel statute. So Ben said on the Lawfare podcast, I believe a couple days ago with Steve Loddick and Quinta and Margaret Taylor, that he was not a fan of the independent counsel statute at all. I think it was the context of Quinta saying that she wanted to advocate for it. I'm not exactly sure about the context, but anyway, I'm 22 years old, so I only know about the Starr investigation from reading stuff in the past, really. So Ben was saying that's like important context, but I've read about Starr, and I was a really close follower of the Russia investigation. Obviously, listened to the show all the time, read Lawfare, and it just seemed, a really interesting framework that Mueller worked under. I mean, he was really at the mercy of, at first, Rosenstein, and then you had Matt Whitaker, and Bill Barr, and it just seemed like a really bad framework because you have these. I mean, like, I guess Rosenstein, you could attribute, negative things to him, but especially Whitaker. I mean, he was obviously, I don't think it's really hard to say that he was kind of a Trump plant, that somebody that would be loyal to him. I mean, I feel like everybody expressed that same sentiment. And Bill Barr, I mean, at this point, I'm pretty sure most people, including maybe you, Ben, would agree that Bill Barr is kind of a Trump loyalist. So, I mean, it just seems like the current special counsel regulations are just not very good, because all of the regulations basically say that the special counsel has to check with the AG or the acting AG for so many different decisions. So I'm wondering, do you think there is a middle ground between the independent counsel statute, when Ken Starr could really run around and look at things that really don't matter, and the Mueller regulations where you're at the mercy of an AG, which could be a loyalist of the president? So I'm wondering, do you think there could be a middle ground, or do you think that the current DOJ regulations are sufficient?
Well, you want to say something first, Ben?
No, go ahead.
I mean, I'm a believer that there's always a middle ground. I mean, I think that, if you find that something is not working optimally, there's probably some other solution to it. I don't want to advocate for policy. I don't think that's my job. But, I mean, I can definitely say, as a reporter covering the Mueller investigation from beginning to end, one of the things that was interesting about it to me was the way in which, in the beginning and basically up until the very end, he did operate with, it seemed to me, a tremendous degree of independence. I mean, he operated, I don't want to say he set his own rules, because, it was made clear to us very early on that they were going to operate essentially as a U.S. attorney's office. So there was a framework for how they envisioned themselves. But, how much they were going to say to the press, which equaled zero, they determined that. How they were going to conduct their interviews and their investigation, they determined that. They did that for themselves. And there was a real kind of almost like bubble of sanctity around that whole investigation, which is, I remember then, the weekend, I think it was a Sunday night, that the so-called Barr summary came out, which was this kind of 4-page, synopsis of the report that we now know did just objectively distort it and misstate some of the conclusions. It felt so completely weird to me recovering that, because it was suddenly like, and now at the last scene of the movie, enter Bill Barr and he takes it from here. It just felt like a violation of, the environment that the special counsel had created. And I think you saw Mueller respond very forcefully to that in his very understated Mueller way when he tried to correct, what Barr had said. So, is there a way to, protect what Bob Mueller had created by sort of his own set of habits and preferences? I'm sure there is, but obviously you want to correct, I would presume some people would want to correct against what they saw as the excesses of the Starr investigation. I defer to Ben on that, who wrote the book on it, but there has to be some kind of middle ground. And, and clearly though, it was Barr's decision to come in and do what he did. plenty of officials before then had opted not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with that, with the following proviso. I'm not sure there is a middle ground. The attempt at the middle ground were these regs. And the regs said, you know, we don't want an independent counsel who is appointed by a court and not fireable by the attorney general or the president. We also want somebody who's got some structural guarantees of independence. And the problem is that as long as the person is removable, those structural guarantees of independence are optional. And you see that with Atkinson, the inspector general of the intelligence community, which has got all these guarantees of independence, but Trump can fire him. And so Trump fired him. And by the way, that turned out to be true of the FBI director too, right? That was ultimately the ability to remove somebody is ultimately a binary thing. You can either do it or you can't. And if you can do it, you can direct the person. Do this, Shane, or I'll fire your ass, right? And so I don't actually know how much middle ground there is. It seems to me you're either going to be in a place where you're going to be guaranteeing enough independence that Lawrence Walsh or Ken Starr can spend 7 years investigating something and drive administration after administration crazy. And, you know, or you're in a situation in which a Bill Barr can come in and behave very aggressively toward a special prosecutor. So you have a kind of pick your poison situation. Now, all that said, I think I'm in the minority on this, but I think the system worked pretty well here. And I say that with giving no quarter to Bill Barr, who I think behaved disgracefully. But Bob Mueller has said under oath that there was no step he wanted to take that he couldn't take. He wrote the report that he wanted to write. The public saw the report. And so the process has I have a lot of anxiety about the failure of the political system to take those results seriously. But it doesn't seem to me that the problem is that Bob Mueller was prevented from doing what he felt was appropriate to do. He prosecuted the people he wanted to prosecute. He got cooperation from the people he wanted to get cooperation from. And to the extent that he was stymied, it was by the president dangling the possibility of pardons before certain people and thus inhibiting their cooperation, which, by the way, you can't regulate because the pardon power is, you can't take that away from the president. Yeah. And so I'm not sure that the problem here is that Bob Mueller was impaired. I think the problem was that he found what he found and the political system didn't care very much.
Yeah. I'm going to briefly detour us. Well, maybe not briefly, maybe permanently. I'm going to detour us to another area. One, I have to tell you that people are giving you compliments of your on your art behind you.
Oh, talk about that, Shane, because
sure.
that art has some special provenance.
It does, and I'll tilt it just so you can see the whole thing. This is a painting by my husband, Joe DeFeo, who is, among other things, a painter.
It's gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. This is in a series called Overstory. And if that reminds you of a tree canopy, you're on the right track, because this is, the perspective here is as if you are looking up into a tree canopy. So Joe does both abstract painting, this is sort of in between abstract and representational. That's one of his representational works, by the way. And then he does abstracts with these kinds of lines and intersecting lines that are not representational, but this is one that's kind of in between. And I love it. People really like it. You can check him out, joedefeo.com, Joe.
I totally want a print of that. That is absolutely, I mean, I immediately identified it as a canopy. Yeah. And it also just struck me as beautiful and light-filled and weirdly full of movement despite like the linear lines, like
you
or like
feel
the
like
lines
you're
in
kind
it.
of going in, or it's kind of exploding.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Very, very. Yeah. It's really
yeah.
lovely.
Yeah. So
well, we have gotten a question from somebody about what rating you expect to get from Room Rater on your room. I have just tweeted at Room Rater asking him or her or it what rating you get for this backdrop. The questioner seems to think it should be pretty high. What do you think you get?
What do they rate it out of?
10. I, Jared Kushner and Mitch McConnell are the only people who've gotten zeros.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm really proud of that.
I would give the paintings definitely a 10. Whether or not my room is doing justice to the painting, I don't know, but I think I'm a solid 7, right?
7?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see if...
I've got if I just move this over, it's a little more, stable. Maybe I've got I don't have a lot of vanity stuff on the wall.
No, it's perfect. I actually quite like it. Yes, lovely.
Nice balance between art and professional stuff. And then there's a lamp. I mean, a lamp's nice.
Yeah, lamp is nice. Variety of depth, I think, is good.
Yeah, I think so too.
All
I
right,
got mobile up here too. You can see it every now and then.
Oh, really? Love
we have
that.
A question from Sean Richardson.
Oh, is it like a Calder?
Yeah.
Kind of like a reproduction, or it's not actually a Calder?
No, it's not. I think it came from a museum store.
It's kind of great. Yeah, love it.
Sean Richardson, the floor is yours.
You have to unmute yourself,
Sean. Unmute yourself, Sean.
It's down at the bottom left of your screen.
I'm trying to unmute Sean for him, but
we'll just read Sean's question.
All right.
Which is not in front of me.
I got it.
Oh, go ahead.
Given Kayleigh McEnany's critical comments today on the size or lack thereof of the Obama administration's pandemic playbook, could you speak to why you feel she did not mention other substantial policy documents, such as the DHS Biological Incident Annex 2017, the Homeland Security Council National Strategy for Pandemic Influenza 2005, or the HHS Pandemic Influenza Crisis Action Plan that were developed during the Bush/Obama administrations? I'm at work and can't voice in. Oh, there you go. Sorry, Sean. So feel free to read this.
Yeah.
So that was my fault.
I can speculate as to why she probably didn't mention those documents, because I suspect she's never heard of them. And kudos to you, Sean, for pulling that out. And you're picking up on something that I've tried to point out a number of times in some of my reporting and some of my tweets, which is that pandemic preparedness is not only something that the Obama administration focused on, the Bush administration focused on it as well. President Bush, in fact, kind of got the ball rolling at a high level on pandemic preparedness, I think in 2005, after reading John Barry's book about the 1918 influenza. And it was 1918, by the way. 1917 is a movie. It's a good one. Which I'm actually reading the book now. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole raft of these things. And I think that this is, I point this out not to say gotcha, or to say that somehow what the Trump administration is going to propose is deficient. We should have a look at it. But, the idea that nobody thought of this is just not true. It's kind of ridiculous. Now, you can argue about whether the emphasis was in the right place or the structures were appropriate. But that there was pandemic preparedness built into the federal bureaucracy in multiple agencies and in the context of Homeland Security, that is just true. I mean, and the documents that you're pointing to back that up.
All right, so we have a question from a voice you may recognize.
I see who it is.
Jonathan Rausch. Jonathan Rausch, I bought all of the books after you were on our show. Look at all of the books that I bought that are your books.
You really did buy them all.
I did. I bought many, many books. I'm reading and I'm like, I love Denial, and now I'm reading this, which is the same book, but there's two different names.
Wow, you even have
I wanted to get we had a whole talk about how it changed titles, and so I was like, I have to get the original.
Jonathan,
so anyway,
she's hardcore. She is a Jonathan Rauch completist.
You're making me so happy right now. I don't know if you have visual on me, but I'm just grinning from ear to ear. Just so you know, I got the answer wrong in demosclerosis. So Government's End is the one to read if you're reading one.
Oh, okay. Great.
It was my second version once I figured it out. So I just want to know what I should think about Judge Sullivan's decision in the Flynn case. I'm a total amateur, but it strikes me as absolutely astonishing and a sign of just how far beyond normal Trump is pushing everyone and everything. But is there precedent for it? Where is it heading? I've been looking for a lawfare article. I can't find one yet, so maybe just tell me.
Well, there have been several actually, but when you say it's beyond normal, what do you mean? He hasn't done anything yet.
Well, didn't he appoint some kind of hearing to find out whether Flynn committed perjury, and he has not in fact dropped the case? He's going to conduct his own investigation of it?
Well, that's a little bit of an overstatement, I think. So it's
unusual what he did to I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but not
also
at all.
That the judge has had about enough shit from Mike Flynn, and that's been for a while.
And I don't think he's done, I don't think what he's done is very significant so far. So he gets this motion from the government, from his point of view, out of nowhere to throw their own case. And so he does nothing for a couple of days. And then he issues a brief order saying, gosh, this is pretty irregular. I'd like to appoint an amicus. I'd like to have an opportunity for amicus to weigh in. And then he asks a particular former federal judge who has argued the other side of the case, of this matter in public and in a Washington Post op-ed, to write an amicus brief arguing against the government and Flynn's position, so that he knows he has the he's getting an adversarial argument. I don't think anything that he's done so far is remarkable at all. I do think at the end of the day, he's probably obliged to give the government what the government has asked for a variety of reasons. But I mean, what he's done so far is exactly what on the day of the motion, Chuck Rosenberg, who's like the soul of reasonable moderation, said any reasonable federal judge would have a lot of questions under this circumstance. He should ask a lot of questions. And so what he's done is he's asked a bunch of questions and asked an amicus to address some of them. So I don't think he's done anything remarkable. Do you, Shane?
Well, I mean, okay, when you put it that way, it sounds like he did exactly what, one would be expected to do in this highly unusual situation. I mean, and I think this is probably, maybe Jonathan's where some of the question is coming from is, it is not, I mean, I don't think it's that customary for, a defendant to try to withdraw his plea to begin with, but for the Justice Department to then come in and undercut the entire proceeding by seeking to withdraw the charges after the guy pled guilty twice. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, the judge is doing what I think people like Chuck and others have said he ought to do, but the situation is extremely unusual.
So the situation is, as far as I know, unprecedented and actually...
I've never heard of something like this happening before.
Right. I think I could not identify another case like this. And I asked Chuck, and Chuck could not identify another case like this.
Sorry, go ahead.
It is a genuinely unusual circumstance. And I think that probably accounts for the unusualness of there's a lot to criticize Judge Sullivan for in his prior handling of this case, in my opinion, but I don't have a problem with what he's done since that crazy government motion.
I was just going to say, just from Gleason was on the bench when I was clerking in the EDNY and had a reputation for basically being a very straight shooter and kind of middle of the road. Like there was not, some judges you have gossip about, that they're terrible people or lazy or neurotic or like whatever it is. And there was nothing like that about him. He was, if anything, a little bit, I think he's kind of a little bit like Emmett Sullivan, frankly. He's kind of, I think he kind of put someone in his own image in a certain extent, and to do this job. But I just to raise a question, which I just think is like, it's small, but like what are the qualifications for being appointed for something like this? It seems like such a weird, do you have to have a law degree to be appointed by do you have to be a lawyer? Do you have to have been a former federal judge? Like, could he have been a state? It just seems like, how does he know Gleason? Why did he pick Gleason? Like that, just the whole thing about beyond accepting the premise that we're bringing in a formal federal judge to accepting the premise or bringing someone outside to kind of referee this.
Why him?
Why this person?
Maybe the judge read his op-ed in the Washington Post.
There you go.
I have no idea. Ben, do you know? I mean, is there I presume the answer is he can pick whoever the hell he wants. But
I mean, it seems a little bit cronyistic, or I don't even know if that's a word. It seems like cronyism,
right?
But yeah.
No, I don't know. So you're looking for somebody to argue the other side, right? Because the defendant and the prosecution are on the same side now. And they're both making the same arguments that your spidey sense tells you may not be right. And right. So you want somebody to come in there and argue the Justice Department's conventional position. So then somebody writes a distinguished
yeah, but that's the judge normally.
Yes, exactly.
If that kind of thing happens, that's just the judge. That's the judge and his or her clerks.
No, but you want it briefed, and you want it, and you want somebody who's gonna. So you announce one day that you're going to take amicus briefs, and then within a few hours of that announcement, a federal judge of some distinction, who, as Kate says, has a rep of being a sort of straight shooter with actually a bit of a concern for defendants' rights, writes an op-ed that is, harshly critical of what the Justice Department did. And so you say, I'd like this person to go through the record and make the opposing arguments. And so he issues he appoints him to do that. I like, what's wrong with that?
No, I don't think there's anything wrong. It just strikes me as so unconventional. And it also just kind of reminds me of how much control is in the hands of a judge in a courtroom, and to kind of do some of this stuff where we feel like we're so confined by these procedures, but kind of to a certain extent, they are malleable and changeable. And that there's no one to, because of how appeals are brought, there's no one to kind of bring the hammer down or to go against Judge Sullivan doing this in any way. And so I just think that maybe he'll get overturned on appeal, right? That's but it'll happen far, much further down the line.
Yeah, and that's assuming at the end of the day he doesn't give the government what he's asking for. My assumption is that he's going to ask 100 questions, he's going to hold Bill Barr's feet to the fire, and then he's going to grant the motion.
But Ben, you said something on the live show we did of Rational Security on Wednesday, that the judge could just stall in this. This is before he actually had appointed Judge Gleason to fill this role. And I think that, and I don't know that Judge Sullivan this is his purpose, and I assume it's not, because I don't think he wants to inject himself into politics. But the more questions,
judges never do that.
You know more judges than me, but I think that the longer this goes on, and the more questions he asks, and the more opportunity there is for reporters to cover it and to write about the arguments and the briefs that say, hell no, Michael Flynn shouldn't be able to, the Judge Commission would be able to draw this. It increases the pressure on the president, right? And who is the ultimate backstop that I have no doubt that Flynn is counting on in the, unlikely scenario that the judge refuses to grant the government's motion. The president's going to pardon him. I mean, I think that's just there's a presumption in there that this is what he's relying on at this point. So, politically speaking for the president, I'm not sure it looks great if there's all this argument that's out there where it looks like, everybody is saying, all the experts are saying, everyone's saying, as he likes to say, that this is a bad idea. And then he's going to pardon him anyway. I mean, he'll do it. And I suppose it won't matter, but it exacts a certain kind of cost, the more argument there is over the wisdom of granting this government motion.
It's true. Although I got to say, in defense of holding the government's feet to the fire about this, the fundamental irregularity is the government litigating a case for more than 2 years and then throwing it the way they did here. And for the judge who supervised this litigation, who took Flynn's plea, who received all of those government briefs, to have a bunch of questions. The relevant rule does say the government can move to dismiss with leave of the court. Right. So he's not outside the bounds of his authority to say, before I grant my leave for this, I have a few questions about what happened here. And I just think that's pretty reasonable. So speaking of reasonable, Jerry has a reasonable question. I can't find Jerry in the participants list, so I'm just going to read it, about the underlying conduct of Michael Flynn. He writes, in general, back channels are not historically unusual. So how would such a normal back channel differ from what Flynn did here? How, Bill Barr, I'm now vamping on Jerry's question. Bill Barr said that Flynn's behavior was actually laudable in his consultations with Kislyak. So what do you think distinguishes the Flynn kind of back channel that they were setting up with the kind of thing that people do all the time and that the Attorney General reasonably describes as laudable?
Well, the first thing is that it wasn't, technically speaking, a back channel in the sense that he was directly talking to the Russian government, not through an intermediary, which when I think of back channel, I think of as, an intermediary or as some kind of track to, like, not official way of talking to people. And so we could, argue about what a back channel is. But a couple other thoughts. One, he was the incoming national security advisor. He was not the national security advisor to the president. And while it is, of course, customary for transition teams to start making contacts with the people that they're going to be doing business with, Mike Flynn was talking about policy in a way that certainly alarmed people in the Justice Department. I don't think that Bill Barr's, explanation that, this happens all the time is exactly right. I don't think that incoming national security advisors try and essentially, preempt or forestall, the policy of the current administration, which is what was happening. I mean, you could say he was right or wrong to do it. That is what he was doing. I mean, they were objectively trying to undercut the administration, and they were quite open about it, I think. So that's different. And also, when you're doing a back channel like this, you don't do it in such a way that what your purpose is to obfuscate the communication. The whole idea of the back channel was that, as described in the reporting on it, was that Kushner and Flynn wanted to set up a secure communications link inside the Russian embassy. Like they wanted to use the Russians' equipment to be able to talk to them. Now, I don't know if their purpose was expressly to then avoid U.S. surveillance by doing it. I don't even know if they understood what it was. Flynn certainly would have, I should say. He was the head of an intelligence agency. He knew what he was doing. I can't speak for Kushner, but that's not normal either. I mean, this seemed to be set up in a way that was all about obscuring what they were doing, both technically and in the sense of Flynn, frankly, not being honest about what he was talking to Kislyak about. I mean, this is the whole thing he pleaded guilty to. So everything about it is irregular. back channeling is not irregular. What Flynn did is.
Yeah. So part of the irregularity, obviously, is that like, do you feel, well, I'm just kind of, follow up on what you just said, but then like a second larger question, which is kind of like the irregularity is that we're in this kind of immense crisis. Is there a sense that that the government's trying to get away with something because of this moment that we're in? They thought that there was maybe just going to be less energy to come after, to like push back against it, less kind of scandal because of everything else that's happening. And then like kind of the bigger picture, which is just like, what has the world looked like for you reporting on national security in the midst of a global pandemic and a quarantine and a lockdown and contact tracing, which must seem like some type of like, frankly, nightmare, I would imagine, like to a person who like literally wrote a book called The Watchers, like something that is like just absolutely like horrifying.
Yeah. So, I mean, to the first question, I mean, we wrote a story, there were 4 of us on this story today that ran in the paper about, how I think that both the Obamagate charges and the release of the unmasking list, so-called, I mean, is to some degree a distraction from the negative attention that the president's getting on the pandemic. Although I think for all the reasons we've just discussed, it was always heading to a point where I think Mike Flynn was, was going to be saved from, going to jail or going to prison. On the question of reporting during a pandemic, I mean, it sucks. Reporting is a social activity. We go talk to people. That is what we do. I mean, it's Marty Barron, our editor, one of his famous, admonitions, go talk to people. He's a man of few words. But it's true. And at a time where, we are engaged in enforced voluntary, but also enforced antisocial behavior, which is to say, don't go out and see people and don't get too close to them. It's incredibly difficult. On the positive side of it, being in a newsroom is a very distracting place. There are cross currents of communication. There are impromptu desk side conversations that are happening. There are conversations that you overhear, that you get pulled into, and that makes it very difficult sometimes to sit down and write. On the other side, that activity is the sort of bread and butter of what we do. And that's kind of the grist that we're always churning to try and report. So both not being able to go out and see sources and not being able to be around colleagues is hard. I don't want to suggest that everything that I do in reporting all involves FaceTime. I mean, there are normal conversations that I have that aren't that sensitive. I can report on the phone, but not being able to be with people for those more sensitive ones is hard. And just the act of reporting, not being able to go have a coffee with someone or have a drink. It's like the kind of interactions that we're having right now. And this is how you do reporting. It's like building relationships and friendships with people. And this.
Oh, we know this is totally on the record, just FYI.
It's totally only like 5 million people watching it. But yeah, no, it sucks. It's really hard.
There's so one of my favorite movies of all time.
Wait a second.
Hold on.
Your average meeting with a source is in a garage with trench coats, right?
You stole my line.
I did?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say that my favorite movie of all time is All the President's Men. It is so much my favorite movie that when I was in 7th grade, I had a sleepover party for my 7th grade birthday and had everyone watch All the President's Men, to which every single girl at my sleepover party fell asleep except for me, who'd seen it 15 times already.
Bold choice, Kate.
I know.
Yeah, that's serious nerd cred there.
Okay, by the way.
But that scene where Dustin Hoffman comes into the story, or not Dustin Hoffman,
Redford.
Yes, thank you. Comes into the story because he just overhears, right? Or it just is
actually, that is Hoffman. That's Woodward. Yeah, he overhears it.
Yeah, Woodward just Oh, yes, you're right. Sorry, it was the other way around. Woodward just kind of hears it.
Sorry, yeah.
And like is kind of like, hey, what are you working on? Hey, I heard you're doing this thing. And that is like so. And then I went out, I did kind of journalism for like 3 years and before I went to law school, and like this is exactly how it kind of ends up working out. So I love that you say that.
It totally is. And just another point of like nerd Hollywood stuff, that movie was not filmed in the Washington Post newsroom, the old one at 15th and M, but it was built to look exactly like it. And Redford did go there in the 70s and spend time. And our new newsroom doesn't look exactly like that. It's more modern, but that interplay that you're seeing, that happens all the time. Also, the last point.
That set looked like the Washington Post newsroom.
Yeah,
when
they did
there.
it down. They
just rebuilt it.
They were crazy about it. Actually, it was great. But one of my favorite lines about Washington, and I especially tell this to like young reporters, is when Hal Holbrook is with Redford in the garage, and Redford's just like, I can't figure it out. I mean, there's this piece of the puzzle, and this piece of the puzzle, and they certainly wouldn't have done anything this crazy. And Holbrook, and people just looks at him and he goes like, forget about all these stories that you and the media have told about these people in the White House. The truth is, these are not very bright guys, and things got out of hand.
It is such a good. I really like
every.
Sorry, we could trade favorite moments in All the President's Men,
but
like almost as much as
I have a serious All the President's Men question, which is, in a world where all the metadata is available, what's the equivalent of a garage during lockdown? I mean, if somebody has something for you that's really sensitive,
it doesn't matter, Ben, because everyone's wearing masks.
You can't meet in a garage and I suppose you could shout across a garage at 6 feet. But what's the
literally? Do you want to know? It's using VPNs and end-to-end encrypted transmission. That's all. It's not even that complicated. It's actually probably way more secure than a garage in a trench coat.
Right. I think that's right. It's encryption. I mean, it's the lifeblood these days.
Yep.
All right. We have time for one more question, and it's going to go to John Bordeaux, who wrote me that his wife calls this show his happy hour, cocktail hour with his imaginary friends. So John, well, you get the last question to Shane Harris.
Thank you. Thanks, sir. I'm starting having flashbacks right now because I was actually a movie usher in Rockville Center, New York in the mid 70s. And I joined that because I thought I'll have air conditioning, it'll be nice and cool, and I can watch a lot of movies. And instead I saw All the President's Men 45 times. So that didn't work out. Good. So my question to you, Shane, is that I have been fascinated with your obsession regarding UFOs. I am not a journalist, but it is my understanding that journalists often have like half stories and unconfirmed notes on certain topics.
Yeah.
So as a journalist with a focus on the intelligence community, who's a pit bull on this topic, what aren't you telling us?
Oh, I wish there were a good answer for that. They're in my closet with a unicorn. No, just kidding.
You have a unicorn?
Well, somebody said unicorn logo, and I said, well, I have one here. I wish, oh man, I wish there was something that I couldn't tell you, that I could tell you now. And there's just not. Although if we go back, and you may have heard their episode of Rational Security a year and a half ago, when the existence of the Pentagon program, this is where everyone learned about my obsession, leaked about, that there was a Pentagon program to study unidentified aerial phenomenon, does not mean they're aliens. I mean, that to me seemed like in the category, John, of like, what aren't you telling us? Like, well, I can't tell you about this office, but it exists. And Harry Reid really gave it a lot of money. To me though, I feel like this is, to be kind of more serious about your question, people often ask me a variation of that, of like, is there something that but you can't really say? And it's never quite that construct where like, I could tell you, but ooh, we'd get in trouble. Like if I can tell you, I want to tell you. And if there is something as a journalist that it's like, I think this might be true and I just don't know, you just like seize on it and you become obsessive. So really it's more, the way I think to look at it is like, like what is the thing that is obsessing you that you can't let go of? And like, what is the thing that you're determined to find out? And sometimes, to be clear, like that drives reporters into like very weird places and they make very bad decisions and wreck their careers. So I'm thinking like Pierre Salinger. But, you have to kind of like dial it back. But reporters, it's more that if, they're the ones who are asking the question more like you are, John, is like, what are you, my source, telling me that you can't tell me? We're not keeping things from people. We're trying desperately to tell you what they are.
So
I have a theory about the source of Shane's UFO obsession.
okay, answer that, but then say that, and then tell me what your secret obsession is, Ben, and then I'll tell mine.
All right, I gotta think about that. But when Shane was a young lad in Oregon, a group of aliens descended on the state of Oregon.
Oh, this
and
is a TV
colonized
show.
it.
That happened.
And they were called the Bhagwan Sri Rajneeshis. And they are recently the subject of a very fine documentary.
So good.
And Shane called Wild Wild Country. And when Wild Wild Country came out, Shane was very moved by it. It was like a piece of his childhood when all of these like nut jobs showed up in Oregon and took over this little town. And by the way, engaged in bioweapons attacks and poisoned people. And so I think if you actually trace back the text of all of Shane's obsessions, it goes back to that formative experience. The aliens, right, descending and colonizing, national security, eccentric groups that want to, do bioweapons attacks, sort of early terrorist groups. So I think it all comes back, including the aliens, to the Rajneeshis when Shane was a wee young lad in Oregon.
So Ben's obsession is conspiracy theories.
Ben's going to be from now on, because I think he's not wrong. Now I'm thinking like, my God, that makes perfect sense.
I was thinking it was much more like consistency, like you covered G-Men and also little green men. I don't know. Nothing.
I fell backwards into covering the national security apparatus, and that was just
you ended up figuring out like someone's got to deal with these people.
But you're right though. You go back to when I was probably like 6 or 7, when the Bhagwan and all those and the people were out in Antelope, which and it was all people talked about, and it was as if aliens had landed. I mean, that is how people who weren't part of the group or part of the cult in Antelope reacted, and the citizens of Antelope certainly reacted that way too.
Yeah.
But it was really the first memory I have of my parents looking at something and being like, what is going on out there? This is absolutely bizarre. Everyone's lost their mind.
They had 100 Rolls Royces
and robes.
I'm gonna go down the internet. I'm gonna go down a Wikipedia hole about this as soon as we sign off.
Just watch Wild Country. It's an incredible documentary, and it's all accurate.
Yeah, it's all true. It's the craziest story you've ever heard.
I was going to say that my obsession is like kind of, well, not the same, but like, I'm just like, I don't know why, but I kind of know why, but like, I'm just completely obsessed with serial killers. I know that that's kind of a trope. Serial killers. Like, I just will like read everything about them. And like, it's not even like a true crime thing. I like to think that it's like, I have a lot of empathy and feelings for people. And I'm just endlessly fascinated by people who have no feelings. Like, I think that it's actually totally fascinating if you can have no feelings. I'm like, tell me what that feels like. It's like the one thing I can't understand.
Did you watch Mindhunter on Netflix?
Yes. It's pretty good. Yeah.
They're not doing a 3rd season though.
I know. That sucks. They couldn't. Well, they're all too popular now. They couldn't make it work and get the money. But
all right, I'm trying to think what my obsession is, and I am. The thing is, I'm not that obsessive a person.
You're just rigorously well. I'll
come up with an obsession in time for tomorrow, but I
you need an obsession, Ben. You got to get one.
All right, you guys nominate an obsession for me.
I love that idea. Let's nominate an obsession for you.
Something that
before we let you go, Shane, though, talk about your books again. Say what books you've written, and remind us of Joe's URL.
Yeah. So I have written 2 books. One called The Watchers: The Rise of America's Surveillance State, which is basically a story of how after 9/11, a group of people, most prominently among them, the former National Security Advisor to President Reagan, John Poindexter, basically, you know, created what we think of as the kind of modern surveillance apparatus. And it's very much narrative nonfiction. So it reads like a novel. It is not meant to be a work of pure journalism. It's meant to be a story. So that was kind of like my post 9/11 book. And then I wrote another book called At War, with the at symbol, which is the rise of the military internet complex. Also narrative nonfiction, but a little bit more repertorial, basically about how cyber security became the dominant national security issue after terrorism. It kind of eclipsed it in some ways, and sort of the new frontier of cyber warfare. So those are my 2 books, and I'm thinking about a third and working on a novel right now, actually.
A novel?
I'm working on a novel.
That's fun.
And people who want to go after Joe's art and buy it all, where can they
They should go to joedefeo.com, Joed as in David, F as in Frank, EO, joedefeo.com. And if you go there now, I was just typing as I checked to make sure that I'm correct. If you go to joedefeo.com, you will see on the landing page the painting that is behind me.
It is so beautiful. I'm completely obsessed. It's gorgeous. It says it's in a private collection. Do you know whose?
Actually, this in fact might be another one in the series, actually, but that I think about it. In fact, yeah, the one behind me might be Overstory number 4, and the one on the website is number 2. But yeah, if you happen to be in Washington, Virginia, out in Rappahannock, you can go to the Gay Street Gallery and see his stuff. And when you go to joedefeo.com, make sure you go on the left and click on the link to Nightmare series, where you will see some of Joe's work, zombies and scenes from horror films, which are quite distinct from what you see over my shoulder.
This is really fun. This is great. Cool. Thank you for
drop him a line. He takes commissions and he sells. I'm his agent.
All right. So we've got to wrap up. Thank you, Shane, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having
you're
me.
a great American and a pleasure as always.
We want you to know that you got a 7 out of 10 on Rate My Room.
Did you rate the room?
Yes, you were completely accurate in your prediction.
I'm glad. I'm glad we agree. I was being honest about. Yeah, that's nice. I hope you gave the painting a 10 out of 10. Thank you.
All right. So, KK, what do you have in the way of a sign off today?
So this sign off, which might have to become our sign off from now on, comes from, just like our name of our show, comes from one of our viewers. And it says that our sign off should be, in lieu of fun, a drinking show with a small fun problem. And I think it's pretty perfect.
All right. Well, cheers to that.
Cheers, guys. Happy weekend.
Yeah. Oh, it's weekend.
We will be back tomorrow, just Kate and I, for planning the show on Saturday. And until then, remember, what do we say, Kate?
In lieu of fun, if you can't have fun, come have fun with us.
Oh, try that again.
Bye.
If you can't have fun, in lieu of fun, you can still hang out with us.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.